Hello, Brain Fitness students. Today we're going to be talking about choosing happiness. Let's face it, we spend a lot of time worrying. Will the money last? Will our health hold up? Are we making the most of the time we have left? These are all natural concerns, especially as we grow older. But there's something worth remembering. While worry can take up space in our lives, it rarely gives anything back. So today, we will shift our attention towards something more nourishing. Happiness. We're going to talk about what happiness really is, how your brain helps or sometimes gets in the way, and what the research tells us about living a happier life. And yes, there are practical, simple ways to cultivate joy. You don't have to move to a mountaintop or buy a yacht. You just have to tune into what really matters. So today we will talk about what happiness really is. We will talk about the difference between happiness and pleasure. We will look at happiness in your brain. We will look at ways that you can become happier, and there are things that you can do. And then we'll talk about ways to cultivate happiness and joy. When we talk about happiness, we often confuse it with pleasure. The two are related, but they're not the same. And understanding the difference between them can help us make more thoughtful choices about how we live and what we pursue. So let's start with pleasure. Pleasure is that quick rush of a good feeling you get when something enjoyable happens. Eating a slice of chocolate cake, buying something new, winning a game, or even getting a compliment. All of these things can feel really great at the moment. And that's because they activate a powerful part of your brain's reward system. Specifically, they cause the release of dopamine, which gives you that burst of excitement or satisfaction. But pleasure is only temporary. It fades quickly, and often we rely on it too much. We find ourselves needing more and more to get the same effect. This is, in fact, the cycle that drives addiction, not just to substances, but even to things like shopping, social media, or food. Our brain chases that next burst of dopamine, and we can wind up feeling drained or dissatisfied in the long run. Now let's contrast that with happiness. Happiness isn't about just how you feel in the moment, it's a sense of being, a sense of deep well-being, contentment, and meaning that carries through your ups and downs in life. It's not just about what's happening to you, but also about what you see and experience the world. Scientists sometimes call this kind of happiness subjective well-being, and it includes emotional satisfaction, a sense of purpose, and feeling that your life matters. What makes pleasure different than happiness? Well, as we sort of said earlier, pleasure is fleeting, while happiness is a stable state of mind. Pleasure is felt in the body, but happiness happens in the brain. Pleasure inspires taking, while happiness inspires giving. Pleasure is often experienced alone, but happiness is shared. Pleasure makes your brain want more, and happiness says it's enough. To give you a broader framework, let's return to Aristotle, the Greek philosopher, who gave us a helpful way to think about the two sides of happiness. One of them is hedonic happiness. That arises from pleasure, engaging in enjoyable activities and indulgences. Eudaimonic happiness stems from meaning, living by your values, helping others, and contributing to a greater cause. So let's return again to pleasure and why it sometimes leads us in the wrong direction. Pleasure, as we've said, is driven by dopamine. When something feels good, dopamine floods your brain and says, hey, let's do that again. In moderation, that's helpful. It encourages us to seek enjoyable experiences and rewards. But over time, if we keep chasing that same dopamine rush, our brains begin to adjust. This process is called tolerance. The first bite of dessert might thrill you. The fifth, not so much. You need more to get the same effect. That's why some people find themselves endlessly scrolling on their phones, shopping for things they don't need, or turning to habits that once felt indulgent but now feel empty. The reward system gets hijacked. When we rely too heavily on these kinds of pleasures, especially the kind that comes from external sources, it can lead us feeling unsatisfied, restless, or even trapped in patterns that don't serve us. What once brought joy now just maintains a sense of normal. Happiness doesn't work like that. It isn't addictive. It grows from within, from connections, kindness, growth, and purpose. And the good news? It doesn't require more, more, more. In fact, it asks for less. Less chasing, less noise, less clutter. That's why understanding the difference between pleasure and happiness matters. It helps us to see where our habits are leading us and how to gently shift towards choices that truly nourish the soul. If you've ever thought to yourself, I used to be happier, what changed? Well, you're not alone in that. As we age, our circumstances shift. Things that once brought us joy may not feel the same anymore. That doesn't mean that happiness is out of reach. It just means we may have to rethink where we are looking. There are some times when happiness might be hard to find. One example is when work no longer defines us. Many of us have spent decades identifying ourselves through our work, but retirement or slowing down can feel like hitting the brakes. Without the routines and rewards of work, we often feel a little lost. Biologically, our brains change too. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for planning and quick thinking, declines with age, but other parts, like those tied to wisdom and emotional balance, often improve. So while we may lose some speed, we gain perspective. And this shift from doing to being open opens new doors for happiness. Another reason is our self-image is changing. In younger years, we might have defined ourselves by how we looked, what we earned, or what we achieved. But as time goes on, those markers shift. That can feel uncomfortable, especially if we've tied our self-worth to them. Letting go of old identities doesn't mean losing value. In fact, it creates space to connect with who we truly are, beyond roles and appearances. It's not easy, but it's deeply freeing. And then another thing is when stuff doesn't help anymore. We've been taught that stuff equals happiness, but our brains adjust quickly to new purchases, leaving us chasing the next thing. Instead of long-term joy, we're left with clutter and a sense that something is missing. Simplifying our lives and focusing on experiences, not possessions, can make us feel lighter, more in control, and, surprisingly, happier. We've taught a lot about happiness and what it means, but what does science say? What really makes a happy life? One of the most fascinating answers comes from a study that's been running over 80 years, the Harvard Study of Adult Development. It's one of the longest and most detailed studies on happiness and health ever conducted. Back in 1938, researchers at Harvard Medical School began following two very different types of men. One group were Harvard sophomores, young, privileged, and full of potential. The other group were boys from some of the poorest neighborhoods in Boston, many from broken or struggling families. Over the years, these men were studied carefully. Researchers tracked their physical health, their mental well-being, their work lives, their marriages, their friendships, and even how they handled stress. What made this study unique wasn't just how long it lasted, but how deeply personal it became. The participants shared letters, memories, struggles, and triumphs. Generations of researchers stayed in touch, and even as these men aged, retired, and passed on, today the study continues through the children and even grandchildren of the original participants. And what did they learn? Well, they discovered a very simple concept. Good relationships make us happier and healthier. Participants who reported feeling closely connected to others in midlife were more likely to live longer, avoid chronic illness, recover faster from hardship, and stay mentally shaped into old age. On the other hand, those who are isolated or lack deep friendships were more likely to suffer from depression, cognitive decline, and earlier health problems. Harvard psychiatrist Dr. George Vaillant, who led the study for over 3 decades, also found that if someone had made mistakes or experienced hardships in their youth, it was love and connection in later life that made the biggest difference. Even more interesting, a strong marriage didn't automatically protect someone from loneliness. In fact, people who had close relationships outside of their romantic relationship, such as friends they could turn to in tough times, laugh with, and share their stories, were among the happiest and most emotionally resilient. Research also suggests that it's never too late to change the trajectory. Even participants who are lonely or troubled in early years experienced greater happiness later in life when they found new relationships, connected with their family, or chose to nurture their emotional lives. Yes, good relationships are the most vital for happiness. It would not surprise you that your experience of happiness, whether it's joy, contentment, gratitude, or even peace, is tied to tiny electrical signals traveling through your brain. This is your brain's reward system, which we have discussed many times during the semester. The central part in the system is that small region deep in the brain called the nucleus accumbens, which is responsible for that joyful, often euphoric feeling we get when something positive happens. The nucleus accumbens works as part of a larger circuit that includes the ventral tegmental area, the VTA, which sends dopamine to the reward system, the prefrontal cortex, which helps us to focus, reflect, and form meaning from our experiences, and the amygdala, which helps process emotions like fear, joy, and anxiety. When you're feeling happy, it's because these areas are in balance and communicating well. Interestingly, while the brain is capable of intense joy, it's also built for survival, which means it tends to focus more on threats than pleasures. That's why good news often fades fast, while negative thoughts can stick around. But with practice, we can retrain our brains to notice the good more often, creating stronger pathways to happiness. That's part of what we'll explore when we look at our section on daily habits. Now, this shift in thinking can change your brain. Brain scans have shown that the brains of people who regularly express gratitude, connect with others, or practice mindfulness actually look different. Their emotional centers are more regulated, and they tend to bounce back from stress more quickly. While your brain controls most of what you feel, it relies on chemicals known as neurotransmitters and hormones to carry out the job. So think of these as your body's emotional messengers circulating through your body and brain to influence your mood, energy, motivation, and connection. We've discussed each of these previously in our class. They include dopamine, the reward chemical. Dopamine is released when we experience something rewarding, like finishing a task, receiving praise, or enjoying a delicious meal. It motivates us to repeat enjoyable behaviors. But as we said, it can also lead to short-term thrills, so we need to use it wisely. Serotonin is the mood stabilizer. Serotonin is linked to long-term happiness, calm, and emotional balance. It also helps regulate mood, sleep, and digestion. Low serotonin levels are often associated with depression. The third are endorphins. Those are your natural painkillers. Endorphins help us to manage stress and pain. They're released during physical activity, laughter, and even when eating spicy food. And oxytocin, which is the bonding hormone. Oxytocin is all about connection. It's released during social bonding and plays a key role in trust and empathy. Together, these chemicals form a kind of emotional toolkit, and it's incredibly easy to release these happy hormones. Engaging in outdoor activities, physical movements, social interactions, and small pleasures can benefit your brain. So, specifically, what can you do to boost your happy hormones? Well, sunlight. A 2008 research study found that sunlight can increase production of both serotonin and endorphins. Exercise. Exercise promotes endorphin release. Exercise can increase dopamine and serotonin levels. Add your happy hormones by exercising with a group, moving outdoors, and going at least 30 minutes. Laughter. 2 unique studies mentioned in our lesson demonstrated that social laughter triggered endorphin release. If you laugh with a loved one, you might even trigger some oxytocin. Oxytocin, yes. Music. Instrumental music, such as music that gives you chills, can increase dopamine, while just listening can put you in a good mood, increasing serotonin production. Musicians may release endorphins while creating and performing music, or dancing, singing, or drumming. And then managing stress. Living with stress causes a drop in dopamine and serotonin. Try methods mentioned above to decrease stress and boost your levels of serotonin, dopamine, and more. And then let's not forget the value of pets. Pets can release oxytocin, which is a bonding hormone, can also increase serotonin and dopamine because of the pleasure you get while petting the pet. And then sleep. Sleep is very important for maintaining the health of your happy hormones. Can you train your brain for happiness? Science suggests that you can, even in later life. Like any habit, happiness strengthens with practice. In past lessons, we've described ways to make us happier. Here's some of them. We've talked about a gratitude journal. Many people have already started a gratitude journal. It's never too late. For example, at the end of every day, write down 3 good things that happened each day and why they happened. Also, sending someone a kind note. Reach out to someone with a kind word, a compliment, or a thank you. Just the impact of writing this note, whether you do it via email or actually on paper, will benefit your happy hormones. Practice mindfulness. Spend a few minutes focusing on the present, either through breathing or stillness. This takes your brain away from the past and the future, which can cause anxiety, allowing you to focus just on the present. Perform a random act of kindness. Smile at a stranger. Help someone. Give someone a small gift. Just some sort of a random act of kindness will help. And then exercise. We've talked about that. Physical activity supports not just the body, but also a positive and resilient brain. So what does this mean for us, especially now in this stage of life? It means that happiness is still within reach, not because life is perfect, but because we have the power to focus on what truly matters when we let go of that constant chase for pleasure and turn instead toward meaning, connection, and self-compassion. We begin to build the kind of happiness that lasts. That doesn't mean giving up on joy or fun. It means making space for things that fill you, not distract you. So take some time to reflect on what gives your life meaning. Nourish your relationships, be present for small moments, and above all, know this: happiness isn't something we find once and for all. It's something we practice every day with intention and care. And yes, some of you are saying, I don't have time to be happy. Well, this is an interesting chart which is found on a positive psychology website, and it describes the amount of effort that is required to do something that will boost your happiness. And so as you look at this chart, you can see that if you smile, that will give you a quite a big bump in your happiness. Whereas the largest bump in your happiness would be keeping a gratitude journal, or going for a run, or volunteering, or the act of kindness. So use this chart to try to add these things to your everyday life, and you too might find some time for happiness. Thank you so much for joining our class. I look forward to seeing you on Wednesday, where we'll do some activities that will help drive home the importance of happiness in our lives. Take care.